Kimyatus Saadah or Alchemy of Happiness. Composed by Imam Ghazali. Preface. If you encounter any difficulty in understanding Tawasif, read my book Kimyatus Saadah, Alchemy of Happiness, that will guide you to the right path, and give you, at a minimum, a fair opportunity to utilize capabilities which God has given you. Thus Al-Ghazali wrote in one of his letters to Najmuddin Fakhrul Mulk, the Seljuk Vizier. Happiness Chemistry is a summary of Al-Ghazali's monumental work, Ihya Ulumuddin, self-written popularly by him in Parsi, not in Arabic as Ihya. Ihya is enough to quote here the opinion of Meredith Zainuddin Iraqi. As a scholar, Al-Ghazali has succeeded in summarizing and sometimes explaining the teachings of the Qur'an and Hadith, in this eternal work which, besides the Qur'an and the Hadith, is the last practical manual and the true religion that exists. This booklet contains 8 sections of the original manuscript. Know that man is not created playfully or carelessly. He was created with the best and for a great purpose. Although it is not part of the eternal, it lives forever. Although his body was fragile and grounded, his spirit was noble and divine. When, in the course of the life of Tsuhud, he is consecrated from the lust of the body, he attains the highest degree. And vice versa, from being a slave to lust, it has the properties of angels. By attaining this level, he finds his paradise in the contemplation of the eternal beauty, and no longer on bodily pleasures. The spiritual chemistry that produces this change in him, such as the chemistry that converts low metals into gold, cannot be easily found. To explain the chemistry and methods of operation that the author composed a work entitled Chemistry of Happiness. These chemistry-filled treasures of God belong to the hearts of the prophets. Anyone who searched for him elsewhere will be disappointed and bankrupt in the next day, when he hears the words, "We have lifted the curtain out of you, and your views on this day are very sharp." Surah 50:22. God has sent into this world 124 prophets to teach people about this chemical recipe, and how to purify their hearts from the lower traits through the forging of the Tsuhud. This chemistry can be briefly described as turning away from the world to face God. There are 4 of them. First, knowledge of self. Second, knowledge of God. Third, knowledge of this world as it is. Fourth, knowledge of the afterlife as it is. Let's start exposing these 4 sections in order. Chapter 1. Knowledge of self. Self-knowledge is the key to the knowledge of God, according to the Hadith. He who knows himself will know God, and as it is written in the Qur'an, we will show our verses in this world and in themselves, that the truth may be seen for them. Well, nothing is closer to you but yourself. If you do not know yourself, how can you know everything else? If you say, "I know myself," which means your outer form, body, face and other body parts, such knowledge can never be the key to the knowledge of God. Similarly, if your knowledge is merely that your hunger to eat, and if you anger attack someone, will you get further advances in this track, considering that in this case your animal is your friend? The true knowledge of the self is in the knowledge of the following. Who are you? And where did you come from? Where do you go? What is your purpose to come and stay here for a while? And where is your happiness and your true sadness? Some of your properties are animal traits, some of which are satanic traits, and the rest are angelic traits. Even if you find out which of these qualities are accidental and which are essential, principal, before you know this, you cannot find where your true happiness is. Animal work is simply eating, sleeping and fighting. Therefore, if you are an animal, preoccupy yourself with these jobs. Satan is always busy waging evil, wits and lies. If you belong to their group, do their work. Angels always reflect on the beauty of God and are totally free of animal qualities. If you have angelic qualities, then strive to attain your original qualities so that you can recognize and reflect on Him the Most High, and be free from the slavery of lust and anger. Also you should find your causes created with these 2 animal instincts. They should subdue and trap you, or you should subdue them and, in your progress, Make one of them a horse and the other as a weapon. The first step towards self-knowledge is to realize that you are made up of an outward form called the body, and the inner being called the heart or spirit. What I mean by heart is not a piece of meat located on the left side of the body, but something that uses other faculties as a tool and servant. In essence, he is not included in the visible world, but the virtual world. He came to this world as a solo traveler visiting a foreign land for trading purposes and who would eventually return to his native land. It is this knowledge of its being and attributes that is the key to the knowledge of God. Some ideas about the nature of the heart or spirit can be obtained by someone who closes his eyes and forgets everything around him in addition to his individuality. Thus, he will also gain a glimpse of the endless nature of that individuality. However, close examination of the essence of the spirit is prohibited by the Sharia. In the Qur'an it is written, "They ask thee concerning the spirit. Say, the spirit is my Lord's business." Surah 1785. All that can be known is that it is an inseparable essence belonging to the world of Tita, and that it does not come from something eternal, but is created. Appropriate philosophical knowledge of the spirit is not a necessary prelude to the journey on the path of religion, but rather arises as a result of self-discipline and patience above the path, as it is said in the Keiran, "Who fought in our way, surely we will show him the path of glance." Surah 29:69. To continue the spiritual battle to gain knowledge of self and about God, the body can be described as a kingdom, soul, spirit as its king and various other senses and faculties as its army. Reason can be called a vizier or prime minister, lust as tax collector and anger as a police officer. By pretending to collect taxes, the lust constantly tends to plunder for its own sake, while anger always tends to roughness and violence. Tax collectors and police officers should both always be placed under the king, but not killed or surpassed, considering they have their own functions that must be fulfilled. But if lust and rage dominate reason, then, cannot help it, the collapse of the soul is bound to happen. The soul that allows the lower faculties to dominate the higher is like one who gives an angel to the power of a dog, or a Muslim to the tyrannical of an infidel. The cultivation of the qualities of demons, animals or angels produces qualities appropriate to those qualities, which on the day of judgment will be manifested in the visible form, such as lust as a pig, vicious as a dog and a wolf, and sacred as an angel. The purpose of moral discipline is to purify the hearts of the lust and the anger, so that like a clear mirror, it reflects the light of God. Perhaps among readers some would object, but if humans have been created with the qualities of animals, demons and angels, how can we know that the quality of angels is the true essence, while the quality of animals and demons is merely accidental and transitional? Upon this question, I replied that the essence of each being is something of the highest within itself and unique to it. Horses and donkeys are both loaded animals, but horses are superior to mules because they are used for war. If it fails in this case, it slumps to the level of a load beast. The highest faculty in it is the reason that makes it contemplative of God. If the faculty is dominant in him, then when he dies behind him the whole tendency to lust and anger, allowing him to be comrade with the angels. In the case of ownership of animal qualities, human beings are less than many animals, but reason makes them superior to them, as it is written in the Quran. We have subjected all things upon the earth to men, Surah 45:13. But if his lesser tendencies triumph, then after his death, he will forever face the earth and yearn for worldly pleasures. Furthermore, the rational soul in man is filled with wonders of knowledge and strength. With it all he mastered the arts and sciences, he could travel from earth to sky back and forth as fast as lightning, and was able to regulate aerial and measure the distance between stars. With it also he can catch fish from oceans and birds from the air, and can subdue animals such as elephants, camels and horses. The sensation is like 5 doors that open to the outside world. But miraculously from all this, his heart has a window that opens up to the invisible world of spirits. In a state of asleep, when the channel of his senses is closed, This window is opened and he receives impressions from the invisible world. Sometimes he could get cues about the future. His heart is like a mirror that reflects everything that is reflected in the Mahfuz. But even in sleep, thoughts of all things that are worldly will blur this mirror, so the impressions it receives are unclear. Nevertheless, after death such thoughts are vanished and all things appear to be in their nakedness. And the words in the Keiran also state, "We have lifted the curtain from you, and today your vision is very sharp." Opening a window in the heart that leads to this visible also occurs in circumstances close to the prophetic inspiration, that is, when intuition arises in the mind, not carried through any sense channel. The more a person purifies himself from the lusts of the flesh and focuses his thoughts on God, the more he will become sensitive to such intuitions. People who are not aware of this have no right to deny its essence. Such intuitions are not limited to the degree of prophethood alone. As with iron, by polishing it sufficiently, it will be transformed into a mirror. So, with adequate discipline, anyone's mind can be made capable of accepting such impressions. This truth is what the Prophet implied when he said, "Every child is born with a fitrah, to be a Muslim. It is his parents who then make him a Jew, a Christian or a Magi." Every human being, in the depths of his consciousness, hears the question, "Am I not your God?" and answered, "Yes." But there is a heart that resembles a mirror that has been soiled by rust and dirt, that it no longer gives clear reflections. While the hearts of the prophets and guardians, although they also have passions like us, are very sensitive to all the divine impression. It is not only with the reasoning of the achievements and intuitive knowledge that the human soul can occupy the level of the jinn Kalans among other beings, but also with the reasoning of power. As angels reign over the forces of nature, so too the soul governs the members of the body. The soul that has reached a special level of strength, not only regulates its own body, but also the body of others. If they want a sick person to heal, the sick person will recover, or want a healthy person to fall ill, then hurt that person, or if he wants a presence, then that person comes to him. In accordance with the consequences of this powerful soul, it is termed a miracle and a magic. This soul is different from ordinary people in three ways. What others see only as dreams, they see in moments of guard. While the will of others affects only their bodies, this soul, by the will of its will, can also move the bodies outside them. The knowledge that others acquire by studying in earnest, reaches them through intuition. Of course, not only are these three signs alone that distinguish them from ordinary people, but only these three are what we can know. As it is, there is nothing that knows the true nature of God, except God himself. Then no one knows the true nature of a prophet, save a prophet. This need not be surprising, as in everyday events we see the impossibility of explaining the beauty of poetry to a person who is immune to rhythm, or explaining the beauty of color to someone who is totally blind. In addition to disability, there are also other obstacles in the attainment of the spiritual truth. One of them is the knowledge that is achieved externally. For example, the heart can be described as wells and senses as the 5 streams that constantly carry water into it. In order to discover the true content of the heart, these streams must be stopped for a moment in any way, and the garbage brought with them must be cleared from the well. In other words, if we are to arrive at a purely spiritual truth, then we must discard the knowledge that has been attained by external processes and which often harden into dogmatic prejudice. Mistakes of another kind, contrary to that, are made by superficial people who, by echoing some of the phrases they capture from the Sufi masters, go around dispersing the curse of all knowledge. He is like someone who is unfamiliar in chemistry spreading the words, "Chemistry is better than gold," and refused gold when offered to him. Chemistry is better than gold, but true chemists are very rare, so are true Sufis. A person who has only a shallow knowledge of Sufism is not superior to an educated person. Similarly, someone who has just tried some chemical experiments has no reason to degrade a rich man. Anyone who examines this issue will see that happiness is related to the knowledge of God. Each faculty in us is happy with everything for which it is created. What loves to indulge in lust, anger likes revenge, eyes happy to see beautiful objects, and ears like to hear harmonious voices. The highest function of the human soul is the perception of truth, therefore in perceiving the truth it gets its own pleasure. Even trivial matters, such as studying chess, are also good. And the higher the subject matter the knowledge gained, the greater the pleasure. Someone would be glad to be trusted for the post of Prime Minister, but how much more pleased would he be if the king were so close to him that he would reveal his secret questions? An astronomer who, with his knowledge, can map the stars and decipher his passages, drank more pleasure from his knowledge than a chess player. After knowing that there is nothing higher than God, then how great is the joy that emanates from his true knowledge of him. The man who has lost the desire for such knowledge is like a man who has lost his taste for healthy food, or whose life prefers to eat clay rather than bread. All the lust of the flesh perish at the moment of death along with the death of the ordinary organs of the passions. But the soul does not. He keeps all the knowledge of God he has, even adds to it. An important part of our knowledge of God arises from the study and reflection of our own bodies that reveal to us the wisdom, power, and love of the Creator. With his power, he awakened the incredible skeletons of the human body from a mere droplet. His policy is expressed in the complexity of our body and the ability of its parts to adapt. He shows his love by giving more than the organs that are absolutely necessary for existence, like heart and brain, but also not absolute need, like hands, feet, light and eyes. To all this he has added as a black ornament of hair, red lips and curved eyelashes. Man is appropriately referred to as Al-Mashagir, or the small body within him. The structure of the body must be studied, not only by those who wish to become doctors but also by those who wish to attain a deeper knowledge of God, as an in-depth study of the beauty and style of language in a great poem will reveal we are more about the genius of the author. Above all, the knowledge of the soul plays a more important role in guiding toward the knowledge of God rather than the understanding of our jasad and its functions. The body can be compared with a horse with a soul as its rider. The body is created for the soul and soul for the body. If a man does not know his own soul, which is something closest to him, then what his claim claims that he already knows other things. If so, he is like a beggar who has no food supply, then claims to feed the entire population of the city. In this chapter we have tried to some extent to describe the greatness of the human soul. A person who ignores it and tarnishes his capacity by rusting or declining it, must be the loser in this world and in the world to come. The true human greatness lies in its capacity to continually make progress. Otherwise, in this temporal space, he will be the weakest of all things, subdued by hunger, thirst, heat, cold and suffering. Something he loves most is often the most dangerous thing to him, and something that his prophets cannot gain except with trouble and trouble. Regarding his intellect, just a small mess in his brain is enough to destroy or drive him insane. As for its strength, just a wasp sting can already interfere with the sense of relaxation and sleep. Regarding the nature, he would be restless just by losing 1 rupee only. And about her beauty, she was just a little prettier than the sickening things covered with delicate skin. If it is not washed often, it will become very disgusting and embarrassing. In fact, people in this world are very weak and despicable. Only in the life to come will he have value, if by means of chemistry of happiness, it increases from the level of animals to the level of angels. If not, then the situation will be worse than the barbarians who disappear and become dust. It is necessary for him to coincide with the awakening of his superiority as the best being, learning to know his helplessness, as it is also one of the keys to the knowledge of God. Chapter 2. Knowledge of God. A famous hadith of the Prophet, reads, "He who knows himself, knows God." That is, by contemplating form and its properties, man comes to some knowledge of God. But since many people who are contemplating themselves do not also meet God, it means that there must be separate ways to do so. In fact, there are two methods to arrive at this knowledge. One of them is so impossible that it cannot be digested with ordinary intelligence and therefore better not explained. The other methods are as follows. If a man contemplates himself, he will know that before he did not exist, as it is written in the Qur'an. Does not man know that before he was nothing? Furthermore, he knows that he is made of one drop of water that contains no intellect, hearing, head, hands, feet and so on. From this it is clear that, no matter how high the level of perfection, he does not create himself, and nor is he able to create a single hair. How very helpless he was when he was just a drop of water. Thus, as we have seen in the first chapter, knowledge of self-pen, he finds in his own reflected form as, say, a miniature of power, wisdom and love of the Creator. If all the intelligent people from all over the world are gathered and their lives extended to indefinite time, they will not be able to make any improvements upon building a single part of the human body. For example, in adjusting front and side teeth on mastication, as well as on tongue, salivary glands and esophagus for ingestion, we find equipment that cannot be made any better. Similarly, one who contemplates the hand with his 5 unequal fingers, 4 of them with 3 joints and 2 thumbs, and in what way he can be used for banning, carrying or beating, will frankly admit that no, it will be possible that human policies can make it even better by changing the number and rules of those radii, or by any other means. If a man further contemplates how his various desires for food, lodging and so forth, the fulfillment of so much profit from the creation warehouse, he becomes aware that God's grace is as great as his power and wisdom, as he himself says, "My mercy is more the breadth of my curse." And according to the hadith of the Prophet, God is softer to the creation of himself. Man becomes aware of God's existence. From his amazing body frame he knows the power and the wisdom of God. And through the abundant gifts to satisfy his various needs, he knows the love of God. In this way the knowledge of the self becomes the key to the knowledge of God. Not only are human attributes a reflection of the attributes of God, but the form of Kimyatus human soul also produces an insight into the form of God's Kimyatus. Thus it can be said that both God and the soul are not bound by space and time, and are beyond the groupings of numbers and qualities. Similarly, ideas of form, color or size cannot be associated with either. One finds it difficult to form a conception of such a nature that is void of quality, quantity, etc., whereas the same difficulties are related to the conceptions of our daily feelings, such as anger, sickness, joy or love. They are the concepts of the mind and are incomprehensible to the senses, while the quality, the number and so on are the concepts of the senses. As the ear cannot recognize color, nor can the eye recognize sound, in our inability to imagine the ultimate essences, namely God and the Spirit, we find ourselves in a region where sense concepts cannot take part. However, as we can see, God is the organizer of the universe, and he, who is outside of space and time, quantity and quality, governs what is so conditioned. That is how the Spirit regulates the body and its members in a state of itself invisible, indivisible and not placed in any particular part. Because, how can something that is not fragmented place in something that can be fragmented? From all this we can see how through the hadith of the Prophet, Allah created man in resemblance to himself. And when we come to some knowledge of the essence of the attributes of God through the contemplation of the essence and the attributes of the Spirit, we will be able to understand the method of working, arranging and delegating the power of God to angelic powers and so on by observing how each of us organizing his own little kingdoms. As a simple example, suppose a human wants to write the name of God. First of all, this desire is plunged in the heart, then taken to the brain by the vital spirits. The form of the word Allah is depicted in the niches of the brain, then runs along the nerve tract and moves the fingers, which in turn move the pen. Thus the name Allah is written on paper exactly as envisaged in the author's brain. Similarly, if God wills something, then it appears in the spiritual plane, which in the Keiran is called the throne L-RZ. From that throne it passes by a spiritual stream toward a lower plane called seat L-seat, then its form appears in Allah al-Mahfuz, which, by the intercession of the forces referred to as angels, manifesting and performing on the earth in the form of plants, trees and animals, as a reflection of God's desire and mind, as the written letters reflect the desire that is in the heart and form present in the author's brain. No one can understand a king except a king. Therefore the Lord has made each one of us a king in miniature, over a kingdom which is an imitation of his infinitely deprived kingdom. In the human kingdom, the throne of God is mirrored by the spirit, the angel, Gabriel, by the heart, conditioned by the brain, and Mahfuz by the space shed of the mind. The soul, which is itself unplaced and undivided, governs the body as God rules the universe. In short, we are mandated by a small kingdom, and we are obliged not to be careless in arranging it. Regarding the introduction of how God nurtures, there are many levels of knowledge. Ordinary physicists, like an ant crawling on a piece of paper and looking at the black letters scattered over it, will show cause only to the pen alone. An astronomer, like an ant with somewhat wider view, can see the fingers that move the pen. That is, he knows that the stars are under the control of angels. Thus, with respect to different levels of people's perceptions, debate must arise in tracking the cause of the consequences. Those whose eyes never see beyond the world phenomena are like the wrong people to place servants from the lowest level to the king's level. The laws of the phrase must remain, or, otherwise, there will be no science and so forth. But to place servants as masters is a big mistake. As long as the differences within the perceptive faculty of these observers still exist, the debate must necessarily continue. Like some blind man who heard that an elephant had come to his town, then went to investigate. The knowledge they can gain is through the senses of feeling, so that when one holds the legs of the beast, the other holds the tusk of the other its ears, and, according to their respective perceptions, they declare it as a bar, a thick tube and a layer of cotton, each taking part to declare the whole. Thus, physicists and astronomers disrupt the laws they catch with the penitent of laws. The same error is thrown at Ibrahim in the Qur'an, narrating that he successively turned to the stars, the moon and the sun as objects of worship, until he became aware of the one who made everything. Ibrahim exclaimed, "I do not like everything that goes down." Surah 6:76. We have a common example of reference to the second cause of what should be referred to first, that is, in the case of what is called disease. For example, if a person loses his interest in worldly matters, has a hatred of common pleasures, and seems lost in depression, the doctor will say, "This is a melancholy case that requires this and that recipe." A physicist will say, "It is a matter of a brain drought caused by hot and incurable weather until the air becomes moist again." The astrologer will associate this with certain conjunctions or oppositions of the planets. As far as their policy reaches, says the Keiran, it is inconceivable to them that what really happened is this, that the Almighty is willing to take care of the welfare of that person, and therefore has ordered his servants, the planets or elements, to create such a state within oneself, the person, so that he can turn away from the world towards his Creator. This knowledge of reality is a shimmering pearl of a sea of knowledge of divinity. Compared to it, all other forms of knowledge become like islands in the middle of the sea. The physician, the physicist and the astrologist, is no doubt right in the branch of knowledge, especially each one, but they cannot see that the disease is, say, a love string used by God to draw the guardians closer to him. About these guardians Allah says, "I am sick and you do not visit me." This is just stroke pen. Illness itself is one of the forms of experience, which is the means by which man come to know the knowledge of God, as he passed the mouth of his prophet, saw. The diseases themselves are my servants, and are subject to at my choice. The above notes enable us to go deeper into the meaning of the appeals inherent in the lips of the believers. Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar. Regarding the latter, we can say that it does not mean that God is greater than creation, because creation is his embodiment, as light is the embodiment of the sun. And it would be wrong to say that the sun is bigger than its own. It means that God's greatness is beyond cognitive ability and that we can only form a very vague and imperfect idea of him. If a child asks us to explain to him the pleasures that are in the possession of sovereignty, we can say that it is like the pleasures he feels in playing with the bat and the ball, even though essentially they have nothing the same except that they belong to the pleasure category. Thus, Allahu Akbar's call means that his greatness goes far beyond our understanding ability. Moreover, this imperfect knowledge of God as we can get is not just a speculative knowledge, but must be accompanied by surrender and worship. If a person dies, he deals with God alone. And if we have to live with someone, our happiness depends entirely on the level of love we feel for him. Love is the seed of happiness, and love of God is grown and developed by worship. Such ibadah and dhikr indicate a certain degree of concern and restraint of bodily desires. This does not mean that one is expected to completely annihilate the bodily desires, for if so, then the human race will perish. But strict constraints must be imposed on its gratification. And since man is not the best judge in his own case, then to establish what restrictions should be imposed should he consult the matter to his spiritual counselors. Such spiritual mentors are prophets. The laws they have established under the revelation of God set limits that must be obeyed in these questions. The person who violates these boundaries has wronged himself, as written in the Keiran. Although this statement of the Keiran is clear, there are still people who, because of their ignorance of God, violate these limits. This culpability can be caused by various causes. First, there are those who fail to discover God through observation, then conclude that God is not there and that this miraculous world creates itself or is there from eternity. They are like someone who sees a beautifully written letter and then suspects that it is written by itself without any authors, or it has always existed. People with the same camp thinking are too far lost to argue with them will be of little use. Such people are like the physicists and astronomers we refer to above. Secondly, a number of people who, due to ignorance about the nature of the real soul, reject the doctrine of A.K.A. life, where man will be held accountable and rewarded or punished. They regard themselves as no better than animals or vegetables, and equally perishable. Third, on the other hand, there are those who believe in God and the afterlife, but only by a weak faith. They say to themselves, God is great and does not depend on us, we worship or not is a matter of no importance to him. They think like sick people who when the doctor is given certain treatment rules then say, well, I follow or not, what's the deal with the doctor? Surely this has nothing to do with the doctor, but the patient can ruin himself by his disobedience. As surely an untreatable disease of the body ends with the death of the body, as well as incurable mental illness will end in pain in the future. In accordance with the words of the Keiran, those who are to be saved are only those who come to God with a clean heart. Fourthly, it is the unbelievers who say, the Sharia teaches us to restrain anger, lust and hypocrisy. This is clearly impossible, since man is created with these innate qualities in him. We transformed the black into white. The ignorant people are totally blind to the fact that Sharia does not teach us to uproot these passions, but to put them within its boundaries. Thus, avoiding major sins, we can earn forgiveness for our smaller sins. In fact, the Prophet said, I am human like you too, and angry like the others. And in the Keiran it is written, God loves those who restrain his anger, not those who have no anger at all. Fifth, is a group that stands out of God's mercy while ignoring his justice, then says to himself, yes, whatever we do, God is forgiving. They do not think that even though God is forgiving, thousands of people are sadly destroyed by hunger and disease. They know that anyone who wants a life, prosperity or intelligence, should not simply say, God is forgiving, but must try hard on his own. Although the Keiran says, all living beings' rizq come from God, there is also written, Man does not get anything but by trying. The fact is, such teachings are from Satan, and such people only speak with their lips, not with their hearts. Sixth, is a group that claims to have attained a certain degree of holiness so that sin can no longer affect them. However, if you treat one of them with disrespect, he will hold a grudge against you for years. And if one of them does not get a food that he thinks is his right, the whole world will appear dark and narrow to him. In fact, if any of them can truly conquer their passions, they have no right to make such a claim, given that prophets, the supreme kind of man, constantly recognize and mourn their sins. Some of them have such great sins that they even abstain from halal things. Once narrated from the prophet, that one day when a korma was brought to him, he would not eat it only because he was not convinced that it was obtained lawfully. While these free-minded people would drink a liter of wine and claim, "I shiver at the time of this writing," as superior to the prophet whose purity is threatened by a date, while they are not affected by that much wine. It is worth it if the demons drown them into total destruction. True saints know that people who cannot control their desires are not worthy of being called human beings, and that a true Muslim is one who gladly accepts the boundaries set by Sharia. The man who strives on any pretext to disregard his duties, is clearly in the influence of Satan and should be invited to speak not with a pen, but with a sword. Such false mystics sometimes pretend to have sunk in the sea of wonder. However, if you ask them about what they are amazing, they do not know. They must be told to be amazed at them, but at the same time to remember that the Almighty is the Creator, and that they are His servants. Chapter 3. Knowledge on the World. This world is a stage or market that the travelers travel on their way to other places. This is where they provide themselves with various supplies for the journey. Clearly, here man by using his physical senses acquires some knowledge of the works of God and, through them, of God himself. A view of him will determine the happiness of his future. To gain this knowledge the human spirit is revealed to the realms of water and clay. As long as his senses are still living with him, it is said that he is in this realm. If all of that goes away and only the nature of its essence is left, it is said that it has gone to another realm. While man is in this world there are two things that are necessary for him. First, the protection and maintenance of his soul. Second, the care and maintenance of his body. The proper care of his soul, as indicated above, is the knowledge and love of God. To be absorbed into the love of everything other than God means the collapse of the soul. The body can be said to be just an animal of the soul's steeds and perish, while the soul continues to be eternal. The soul must take care of the body exactly as a pilgrim, on its way to Mecca, taking care of the Antanya. But if the pilgrim spends his time feeding and decorating his camel, the caravan will leave him and he will die in the desert. The physical needs of man are simple, consisting of only three things: food, clothing and shelter. But the physical desires embedded in him and the desire to fulfill them tend to rebel against the more recent reasoning of the passions. Accordingly, as we saw above, they need to be restrained and controlled by the laws of God propagated by the prophets. As for the world we must work on, we find it is grouped into three parts: animals, plants and added goods. The products of all three are constantly needed by humans and have developed three great jobs: the work of the weavers, builders and metalworkers. Again, they have many lower branches like tailors, masons and smiths. Nothing thereof can be completely free of others. This gives rise to a wide range of trade relationships and often leads to hatred, jealousy of the day, jealousy and other mental illnesses. Consequently, disputes arise, the need for political and civilian rule and the science of law. Thus, the jobs and businesses of this world have become increasingly complicated and causing chaos. The main reason is that humans have forgotten that their needs are actually only three: clothing, food and shelter, and that they exist just to make the body a worthy vehicle for the soul in its journey to the next world. They fall into the same mistake as the pilgrim to Mecca who, forgetting the purpose of pilgrimage and himself, is forced to spend all his time feeding and decorating his camel. One would surely be captivated and preoccupied by the world, whom the Messenger of Allah called a more powerful magician than Harut and Marut, unless the person exercises the most rigorous scrutiny. The character of the deceiver from this world can take many forms. First, he pretends to be always staying with you, while in fact he is slowly stepping out of you and delivering a farewell, as a seemingly fixed image, but the reality is always moving. Similarly, the world presents itself under the guise of radiant but immoral grandmothers, pretending to love you, loving you and then defecting to your enemies, leaving you to die miserably out of frustration and despair. Jesus saw the world revealed in the form of a bad old woman face. He asked the woman how many husbands she had, and God answers, countless. He asked again whether they were either divorced or divorced. Said the woman, he had beheaded them all. I am astonished, said Isa, for the wretchedness of those who see what ye have done unto others, yet still desire you. This magic lady wraps herself in beautiful, jewel-filled clothes, covers her face with a veil, then begins to seduce a man. Many of those who follow it lead to the destruction of themselves. Messenger of Allah told that on Judgment Day, this world will appear in the form of a spooky grandmother, with green eyes and bulging teeth. Those who see them will say, forgive. Who is this? The angel will reply, this is the world in which you fight and destroy each other's lives. Then she would be thrown into hell while she screamed out loud, oh my God, where are my lovers first? God will then command that they also be cast to follow him. Anyone who is seriously contemplating past immortality will see life as a journey that is reflected by years, leagues, measure of distance, about 3 miles by the moon, miles by day, and the steps by moment. Then, what words could describe the stupidity of a man who seeks to make it a lasting abode and make plans for the next 10 years on what he may never need, since it is very likely he is 10 days behind soil. The people who have indulged themselves indefinitely with the pleasures of this world, at the time of his death will be like someone who fills his stomach with selected and delicious foodstuffs, then vomits it up. The delicacy has been lost, but the discomfort lies. The more abundant possessions they have enjoyed, gardens, male and female slaves, gold, silver and so on, the harder they will feel the bitterness of separating them. This bitterness will feel more severe than death, because the soul that makes greed as a habit will still suffer in the world to come due to the pain of unpopular passions. The other dangerous nature of worldly things is that they initially appear as mere trivial things, but these insignificant things each branch off innumerable to swallow up all human time and energy. Isa, said, the lover of this world is like one who drinks the seawater. The more drinking, the more thirsty he ends up to die from the unpredictable thirst. Rajul said, you can no longer mix with the world without being polluted by it, as you cannot dive in water without getting wet. The world is like a table laid out for guests who come and go. There are gold and silver plates, food and perfumes that abound. The wise guest eats as much as he needs, breathes in the smell, thanks the host, and leaves. Instead, the foolish guest tried to bring in some gold and silver plates only, with the consequences of it being torn from his hands, and he was thrown into a state of disappointment and shame. We will cover the description of the deceptive nature of the world with the following shorts. Suppose a ship will arrive at an island that is heavily forested. The boat captain told the passengers that he would stop for a few hours there, and they could take a walk on the beach for a while, but warned them not too long. So the passengers were downed and scattered in various directions. Nevertheless, the wisest man will soon return, discovering that the ship is empty, then choosing the most comfortable place in it. The second group of passengers spent a little longer on the island, admiring the leaves, trees and listening to the singing of birds. When they returned to the ship, they found that the most convenient places on the ship had been filled and were forced to settle for somewhat less comfortable places. The third group walked the streets further and found beautifully colored stones, then took them back to the ship. The delay forced them to crouch away at the very bottom of the vessel, where they found the rocks they were carrying, which had then lost all its beauty, interrupted them on the journey. The last group strolled so far that it could not be reached by the voice of the captain of the ship calling them to return to the ship. So the ship was finally forced to sail without them. They hang around in a state of no hope and eventually die of hunger, or fall prey to wild animals. The first group reflects those believers who alienate completely from the world, and the latter group is a group of unbelievers who only take care of this world and completely ignore the coming. Two groups of them are people who still have faith, but occupy themselves, little or much, with the futility of things now. Although we have said many things against the world, it must be remembered that there are some things in this world that are not included in it, such as science and good deeds. Someone brings with him the knowledge he has to the world to come, and, although his good deeds are past, the effect remains in his personality. Especially with worship that keeps people constantly remembering and loving God. These include good things, and as stated in the Keiran, will not be erased. There are other good things in the world, such as marriage, food, clothing and so on, which the wise man uses to help him achieve the world to come. The other objects that captivate the mind that causes every to this world and are careless about another world, are truly evil and mentioned by the Messenger of Allah. In his saying, the world is cursed and everything contained in it is cursed, except the remembrance of Allah and everything that supports it. Chapter 4. Knowledge of the Improvement. With regard to the heavenly blessings and tortures of hell that will follow this life, all those who believe in the Quran and Sunnah know enough. But there is something that is often overlooked by them, that there is also a spiritual heaven and a spiritual hell. Concerning the spiritual heaven, Allah speaks to his prophet, the eye sees not, neither ears hear it, nor does it ever occur in the hearts of men what is prepared for those who fear. In an enlightened human heart there is a window that opens to the essence of the spiritual world, so that he knows, not from hearsay or traditional beliefs but with real experiences, anything that causes harm or happiness in the soul, just as clear and firmly as a doctor knows what causes illness or heals the body. He knows that knowledge of God and worship is cure, and that ignorance and sin are death poison for the soul. Many people, even so-called clerics, for following blindly others, have no real belief in their faith regarding the happiness or suffering of the soul in the afterlife. But the person who wants to study this subject with a mind unsettled by prejudice will come to a clear belief about the matter. The consequences of death on the composite nature of human being are as follows. Man has two souls, an animal soul and a spiritual soul. The spiritual soul is an angel. The place of the animal soul is in the heart, the place from which the soul spreads like fine steam and infiltrates all members of the body. Energizes or sees in the eye, hears to the ear, and to all members of the body, providing the ability to perform its functions. This can be compared to a lamp placed inside a hut whose light falls on the walls wherever it goes. The heart is the axis of this lamp, and if the oil discharges are cut off for a reason, then die the lamp. Such is the death of the animal soul. Not so with the spiritual soul or the human soul. He is invisible and with him man recognizes God. He is probably an animal rider. And when the animal soul is destroyed, it remains, but like a horseman who has come down or like a hunter who has lost his weapon. The horse and the weapons were conferred on the human soul so that by it all he could pursue and capture the immortality of love and knowledge of God's challenge. If he had managed to make the arrest, instead of complaining, he was relieved to be able to get rid of the weapons. Therefore the Messenger of Allah said, death is a gift of God that is expected by the believers. But woe if the soul loses its horse and the weapons of the hunt before it gets the prize. Her sadness and regret will be unspeakable. A somewhat further discussion will show how different the human soul is from the body and its members. Every member of the body can be damaged and stop working, but the individuality of the soul is undisturbed, Furthermore, the body that you have now is no longer a corpse as you had in childhood, but it is completely different. Nevertheless, your current personality is the same as at that time. Therefore, it is very easy to imagine it as continuing together with its essential properties independent of the body, such as knowledge and love of God. This is the meaning of the verse of the Qur'an, good things are eternal. But, if instead of bringing your knowledge with you, you are in the ignorance of God, this wickedness is also an essential trait and will live eternally like the darkness of the soul and the seed of sadness. Therefore, the Keiran says, the man who is blind in this life will be blind in the hereafter and get lost from the straight path. The reason for the return of the human spirit we are talking about refers to a higher world is that it originates there and that it is angelic. He is sent to this lower space in contrast to his will to gain knowledge and experience. As Allah says in the Quran, come down from here all of you, will come to my commandments and who obeys them is not necessary fearful and unnecessary they are anxious. The verse, I breathed into the person of my spirit also shows the celestial origin of the human soul. Just as the health of the animal soul is a balance of parts of its preparation, and this balance can be restored if disturbed, by healthy medicines. So is the health of the human soul in the form of a moral balance maintained and improved, if required, by commandments ethical and moral teachings. With regard to the future of the world in the future, we have seen that the human soul is essentially independent of the body. All objections to her Composite after death, based on the alleged existence of the need for recovery of his former body that had fallen to the ground. Some Kalam experts suspect that the human soul is not destroyed after death, even restored. But this is in fact contrary to both reason and the Quran. The former tells us that death does not destroy the essential individuality of a human being, and the Quran says, do not you think those killed in the path of Allah are dead? No, they are alive, rejoice with the presence of their Lord and in their overflowing gifts. No mention is mentioned in the Sharia of the dead, good or evil, as annihilated. In fact, the Prophet are reported to have asked the ghosts who were killed about whether they found the punishments that were threatened to them something right or not. When his followers asked him what was the point of asking them, he replied, they can hear my words better than you. Some Sufis have been able to see the invisible world and hell, revealed to them in times when they are in trance like death. At the time of recovering consciousness, their faces depict the nature of the expressions they have received with tremendous signs of joy or panic. But there is no longer a vision to prove to people who think anything will happen. That is when death has uprooted its senses and left it without anything but its naked personality. If when on earth it is too preoccupied to occupy itself with sensory perception objects, such as wife, children, wealth, land, male and female slaves and so on, he will suffer when losing these objects. On the other hand, if he has turned his back so far away from all worldly things and affirming his immense affection for God, he will welcome death as a means of escaping worldly hassles and joining his beloved one. In this case, the words of the Prophet will be proved. Death is the bridge that unites friends with friends. The world is a heaven for the heathen, and a prison for the believers. On the other hand, all the suffering the soul endures after death stems from an exaggerated love of the world. The Messenger of Allah said that all the kafir after death will be tortured by 99 snakes, each having 9 heads. Some simple-minded people have examined the graves of these pagans and wondered why they could not see these snakes. They do not understand that these snakes are in the spirit of the unbelievers and that they are already in the unbelievers, even before he dies. Because they are actually symbols of his evil nature, such as jealousy, hatred, hypocrisy, arrogance, cunning and so on. These qualities are all sourced, directly or indirectly, to the love of this world. That is the hell that is reserved for those who in the Quran are said to confirm their hearts to this world more than the hereafter. If the snakes were merely external, they could hope to escape from their torture, even for a moment. But if they have become their innate traits, how can they escape? Take for example the case of someone selling a slave girl without knowing how far she has been tied to her until that woman has been completely out of her reach. Then the love of the slave, who had been asleep, awakened within him with an intensity that tormented him, stung him like a serpent. He can go crazy for it, stomping himself into fire or water to escape from it. This is the result of the love of the world, which was never imagined in those who had it until the world was taken from them, and then the torture of futility made them willing to trade it with only external snakes and crabs, whatever the amount. Therefore, everyone who sins brings his own punishment to the world behind death. It is true of the Keiran. Verily ye shall see hell. Ye shall see it with the eyes of faith, and hell circles the unbelievers. He did not say he was going to circle them, because hell is circling them right now. Someone might object. If so, then who can escape from hell? For who is a man more or less unbound to the world with various bonds of pleasure and interest? To this question we answer that there are people, especially the fakirs, who have completely abandoned themselves from love of the world. But even among people who have worldly possessions like wives, children, houses and so on, there are still people who, despite their love of these things, love God more than anything else. Their case was like a man who, despite having a dwelling in a city, when asked by the king to fill a power station in another city, he did so with pleasure, for the posts of power were more precious to him than his former residence. The prophets and many of the saints are such people. In large numbers, there are others who have a love for God, but his love for this world is so excessive in themselves that they will have to suffer considerable torment after death before they are completely liberated from it. Many have a love for God, but one can easily test himself by seeing where he tends to wave his love arms when God's commands come in clashing with some of his desires. The ownership of a love for God that is not enough to hold a person from rebellion to God is a lie. We have seen above that one kind of spiritual hell is in the form of a forced separation of worldly things to which the heart is bound too tightly. Many people unknowingly carry within themselves such germs of hell. They will feel like a king who, after living a life of luxury, jumped from his throne and became a laughingstock. The second type of spiritual hell is shame, that is, when one is awakened to see the nature of the actions that he once performed in his naked essence. The swearing man will see himself in the form of a cannibal who eats the flesh of his dead brother. The person who has envy will appear as someone who throws stones at the wall, then the stones bounce back and about the eyes of his own son. This kind of hell, that is shame, can be summed up with the following brief parable. Suppose a new king finished celebrating the marriage of his son. In the evening, the young man went out with some friends and then returned to the palace in a drunken state. He entered a bright room and then lay beside the body he thought of as his bride. In the morning, when his consciousness recovered, he was taken aback when he found himself in a mortuary morgue. The sound is the litter of a corpse, and the misleading form as the bride is the corpse of an old woman who begins to rot. When he came out of the morgue in the shabby clothes, how embarrassed he was when his father, the king, approached him with a group of soldiers. It is a picture of the parable of shame that will be felt in the afterlife by people who greedily surrender themselves to the things they consider to be happiness. The third spiritual hell is in the form of disappointment and failure to reach the real object of Composite. Man was created with the intention to reflect light of knowledge of God. But if he arrives in the hereafter with a soul that is thickly covered by the rust of sensual lusts, he will utterly fail to gain the purpose of his creation. Disillusionment can be described in the following way. Suppose someone is passing through a dark forest with some friends. Here and there flickering on the ground, scattered colored stones. His companions gathered and carried them while advising him to do the same. Because, they said, we hear the stones will get a high price where we will go. But this man instead laughed at them and called them morons because they kept a futile hope of getting something, while he himself could walk freely unencumbered. Then they went before the light of the land and found that the colorful stones were pomegranate stones, emeralds and other gems of unlimited price. The person's disappointment and regret for not collecting things that are within his reach is easier to imagine than to describe. Such is the regret of those who, through this world, are not seeking the jewels of virtue and religious treasures. Human travel in this world can be grouped in 4 stages: the senses, experimental, instinctive and rational. In the first stage he is like a termite who, despite having a vision, has no recallability and will abolish himself constantly in the same candle. In the second stage, he is like a dog who, once bitten, will run away when he sees a cane. In the third stage, he is like a horse or sheep who, instinctively, flies instantly when he sees a tiger or wolf, his natural enemies, while they will not run if they see a camel or a buffalo, even though these 2 animals are larger in size. In the fourth stage humans completely overcome the limits of the animal so as to some extent, predict and prepare for the future. His movements were initially comparable to the usual walks on the ground, then across the sea by a ship, then on the fourth landing, when he was familiar with the essence, walked on the water. Meanwhile, beyond this plane there is still a 5th plane known by prophets and guardians who can be compared with flying through the air. So humans have the ability to just on different planes, ranging from animal planes to angelic planes. And precisely in this case lies the danger, from the possibility of falling to the lowest plane. In the Qur'an it is written, "We have offered a responsibility or free will to the ocean and the earth and the mountain. They refuse to bear it, but man wants to bear it." No animal nor angel can change the level and place it is placed. But one can sink to the planes of animals or fly to the planes of angels, and this is the meaning of the burden, as mentioned above by the Keiran. Most humans choose to be in the 2 lowest stages mentioned above, and those who remain are usually always hostile to people traveling or travelers much less. Many people of the former class, having no firm conviction about the world to come, when overwhelmed by sensual lusts, reject it altogether. They say that hell is an invention of mere Kalam scholars to frighten people. They looked at Kalam scholars with open contempt. Arguing with people like this is of little use. Nevertheless, there is something to be said about this kind of person who might make it stop and reflect. Do you really think that 124,000 prophets and guardians who believe in the life of the future are all wrong and you, who reject it, right? If he replied, "Yes, I am so sure, as I am sure that 2 are greater than 1, that the soul and future life in the form of happiness or punishment is absent," such a human being has no hope. All that can be done is to leave it alone while remembering the words of the Keiran. Though you warn them, they will not remember. But if he says that the future life is a miracle, it is only that the doctrine is full of doubts and mysteries, so it is impossible to decide whether or not it is true. Then someone can say to him, "If so, you should get it right about it." Suppose you are going to eat food, then someone tells you that a snake has spit into it, so it's likely you will hold back and better restrain the pain of hunger than eat it, even though the person who informs you may just joke or lie mere. Or suppose you are ill and a poet-writer says, "Give me a dirham and I will write a poem that you can bond on your neck, which will cure him from illness." You may be giving the dirham you asked for in order to get the benefit of the talisman. Or if a germ will say, "By the time the moon has reached a certain form, take this medicine and that and you will be healed." Though you may think very much about astrology, chances are you will also try that experience in the hope that the person is right. Do not you think that a trustworthy truth is also present in the words of the prophet, the saints and the saints, who convince the people of the existence of the future life, as the promise of a wizard or an astrologer? People dare to travel through the sea that is risky in hopes of a prophet. Then will not you bear a little bit of suffering in the present for the eternal happiness in the hereafter? Sayyidina Ali Zain al-Abidin, son of Hisan ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib, grandson of the Prophet, when arguing with a Gentile once said, "If you are right, then none of us will suffer worse conditions in the future. We are right, then we will be spared and you will suffer." This is not because he himself is in doubt, but only to create an impression for the unbelievers. Based on all the above discussion, it can be concluded that the main human affairs in this world is to prepare for the world to come. Even if he hesitates about futures, reason teaches that he must act as though it exists by considering the extraordinary effect that may occur. Salvation of those who follow the teachings of God. Chapter 5. About music and dance as a religious life. The human heart was created by the Almighty like a flint. It contains a hidden fire that is immersed by music and harmony and offers excitement for others beside itself. These harmony are the echoes of a higher world of beauty, which we call the world of spirits. He reminds man of his relationship with the world, and evokes such deep and unfamiliar emotions in himself, that he himself is powerless to explain it. The influence of music and dance is very deep, lit love that has slept in the heart, a love of the mundane and the senses, or the divine and the spiritual. Accordingly, there is debate among theologians about the halal and the haram of music and dance in religious activities. A sect, Zaharia, argues that God is totally incommensurable with humans, while rejecting the possibility that humans can truly feel love for God. They say that man can only love something that belongs to his species. He really feels something that he thinks as love to the Creator. They say it is nothing more than mere projection, or the shadows created by his fantasies, or reflection of love to fellow beings. Music and dance, according to them, deal only with love for beings, and therefore haram in religious activities. If we ask them what is the meaning of love to Allah commanded by the Sharia, they answer that it means obedience in worship. This error will we refute the chapter that will discuss the love of God. Right now, let's satisfy ourselves by saying that music and dance do not give something that was not in the heart, but just woke up sleeping emotions. Therefore, saving love to God in the heart which is commanded by the Sharia is entirely permissible. In fact, participating in activities that enlarge it is commendable. On the other hand, if his heart is full of sensual desire, music and dance will only add to it. Therefore, is forbidden to him. Meanwhile, if listening to music is just a mere entertainment, then the law is mubah. Because, just the fact that music is fun does not necessarily make it haram, just as listening to a bird goes off, or see green grass and running water is not forbidden. The innocent character of music and dance that is treated merely as entertainment, is also justified by the Sahih hadith we receive from St. Aisha, who narrates, on one feast, some Habsas danced in the mosque. The Prophet said to me, "Do you want to see it?" I replied, "Yes." Then I lifted him up with his own blessed hand, and I enjoyed the show so much that more than once he said, "Not quite." Another hadith from St. Aisha is as follows. On a feast day, two girls came to my house and started singing and dancing. The Prophet entered and lay down on the couch, turning his face away. Suddenly Abu Bakr came in and, seeing the girls play, he exclaimed, Satan's flute in the Prophet's house." The Prophet turned to him and said, "Let them, Abu Bakr, today is the feast." Apart from cases involving music and dance that awaken the lusts of demons who have slept in the heart, we find there are cases that show them altogether. For example, the singing of people performing the pilgrimage celebrating the greatness of the Bayatullah in Mecca, thus encouraging others to go on pilgrimage, and the war-stirring music of the listeners and giving them the spirit to fight the unbelievers. Similarly, sad music that evokes sorrow for sins and failures in religious life is also permissible, such as David's music. A burial song that adds to the sorrow of death is not permitted, for it is written in the Qur'an, "Do not be sad for what's missing from you." On the other hand, happy music at parties, such as marriage and circumcision or returning from a journey, the law is lawful. Now we come to the use of music and dance that is completely religious. Sufis make use of music to arouse greater love for God in themselves, with whom they often gain spiritual vision and excitement. In this state their hearts become as clean as silver burning in a furnace, and attain a degree of sanctity that can never be attained by a mere conscience, albeit as heavy as anything. The Sufis then become so conscious of their connection with the spiritual world that they lose all their attention to the world and often lose their sensual consciousness. Nevertheless, Sufi candidates are forbidden to take part in this mystical dance without the aid of the pair, sheikh or spiritual teacher. It was narrated that Sheikh Abul Qasim Jurjani, when one of his disciples asked permission to take part in such a dance, said, "Live 3 days of fasting, then send them to cook tantalizing foods, and then you still prefer that, you can come." After all, a disciple whose heart has not been entirely purified from worldly passions, though it may have received a cursory glimpse of the path of tasawwuf, must be forbidden by his sheikh to take part in such dances, for that would only cause more harm than good maslahatnya. Those who reject the nature of ecstasy and the spiritual experiences of the Sufis only acknowledge the narrowness of the mind and the superficiality of their insight. Nevertheless, they must be forgiven, for believing in the essence of a state that has not been personally experienced is as difficult as understanding the pleasures of staring at the green grass and running water for a blind man, or for a child to understand the enjoyment of carrying out the government. Therefore a wise man, although he himself may have no experience of such circumstances, will not deny its nature. For what other fault is greater than the one who denies the nature of something just because he himself has not experienced it? Regarding these people, it is written in the Qur'an, "Those who are not guided will say, this is a real hypocrisy." As for the erotic poetry read at the Sufi meetings, which many people object to, we must remember that if in such a poem are mentioned about the separation from or fellowship with the beloved, the Sufis, who are deeply in love with God, using such a phrase to explain separation and fellowship with Him. Similarly, dark streets are used to explain the darkness of infidelity, brightness of the face for the light of faith, and drunk as the Sufi ecstatic. Take for example the verse of a poem. Probably had wine 1,000 doses, but, until you drained it, no joy you feel. With that the author intends to say that the true religious enjoyment A.K.A. will be achieved through official orders, but with a sense of interest and desire. Someone may have talked and wrote about love, faith, piety and so forth, but before she has these qualities, they are not useful to her. Thus, those who seek the faults of the Sufis, because the Sufis are deeply affected, even to the point of ecstasy, by such stanzas, are only superficial and intolerant people. The camel is sometimes influenced by Arabic songs sung by its riders so that it will run fast, carry heavy burden, until finally falling tired. Nevertheless, those who hear poetry on Sufis are in danger of being cursed, if he applies the poems he hears to God. For example, when he hears poems like, "You change from your past tendencies," he should not apply them to God, which cannot change, but for himself and his own mood. God is like a sun that always shines, but for us sometimes his light is blocked by some of the objects that exist between us and him. It is narrated that some scholars reach ecstasy level in such a way that they are lost in God. So it is with Sheikh Abul Hasan Nuri who, when hearing a certain verse of poetry, fell into a state of ecstasy and penetrated into a field full of freshly cut sugarcane rods, running all the way until his feet were bleeding and finally died shortly after that. In such cases, some argue that God has truly fallen into man, but this is an error as great as that of a man who, when he first saw his reflection in the mirror, held that he had been united with that mirror, or that the red and white colors reflected by the mirror are the innate properties of the mirror. The ecstatic circumstances experienced by various Sufis, according to the dominant emotions in it, namely love, fear, lust, repentance and so forth. These circumstances, as we have mentioned above, are accomplished often not only as a result of listening to Quranic verses, but also stimulating poems. While people object to poetry reading, as well as the Qur'an, on such occasions. But it must be remembered that not all verses of the Qur'an are meant to evoke emotion. For example, an injunction that a man should inherit 1/6 of his property for his mother and so on for his sister, or that a woman left behind her husband must wait 4 months before being allowed to marry again with others. Very few people and only very sensitive can fall into religious ecstasy by such verses. Another reason that justifies the use of poetry, as well as Quranic verses, in such occasions is that people have become so familiar with the Keiran, many of which have even memorized it, so the effect of its readings has been so collected by repeated looping. One cannot always quote new verses of the Keiran as can be done with poetry. Once when some Arabs of Bedouin listened to the Keiran for the first time and became very moved by it, Abu Bakr said to them, "We were once like you, but now our hearts have hardened," meaning that the Keiran has lost some of its influence over those who are familiar with it. For the same reason, Caliph Umar used to order pilgrims to Mecca to leave the place as soon as possible. Because, he said, "I am afraid that if you become too familiar with the holy city, your amazement of him will disappear from your caution." There is also the use of singing and musical instruments, a flute and a drum, in a weightless and reckless way, at least in the eyes of the common people. The majesty of the Keiran is inappropriate, albeit temporarily, linked to things like this. It is narrated that when the Prophet, entered the house of Raya, daughter of Muads, some of the girl singers who were there suddenly began to sing their songs in honor of him. He immediately asked them to stop, for the praise of the Prophet was a theme too sacred to be treated so. There will also be danger if the verses of the Keiran are used specifically, so that their listeners will relate it to their own interpretation, and this is forbidden. On the other hand, there is no danger that may arise in interpreting the lines of verse in various ways, because indeed the meaning given by a person to a poem does not have to be the same as that given by the author. Another form of these mystical dances is to hurt yourself while tearing clothes. If this is the result of a pure ecstatic state, then there is nothing to say against it. But if this is done by so-called experts, then this is a mere hypocrisy. In every case, the most skilled person is capable of controlling him, until he really feels obliged to give a channel to his feelings. It is narrated that a disciple of Sheikh Juaid, when hearing a song at a meeting of Sufis, could not help but start shrieking in ecstasy. Junaid said to him, "If you do that again, do not stay with me again." After the incident, the young man tried to restrain himself. But in the end one day his emotions were so strongly resurrected that, after such an old and so stressful, he cast a scream and then died. In conclusion, in organizing such meetings, attention must be given to time and place, and that no audience with improper intentions is present in it. The people who participate in it should sit quietly, not look at each other, bow their heads, as in prayer, and concentrate their thoughts on God. Everyone should be aware of everything that might be inspired into his heart, and not make any movements that come from self-conscious stimuli. But if any one of them rises in pure ecstasy, then all the people present should also rise with him, and if there is a turban of someone who is dated, then another person must put his turban down. Although this is new in Islam and is not accepted from the companions, we must remember that not all things are forbidden, but only those that are directly contrary to the Sharia. For example, Tarawih prayer. This prayer was first instituted by Caliph Umar. The Prophet said, "Live with everyone according to his habits and temperament." Therefore, we are justified to do certain things to please people, if uncompromising will hurt them. It is true that the companions did not have the habit of standing when the Prophet saws enter, because they do not like this practice. But in areas that have these habits, and not doing them will create displeasure, it is better to compromise with them. The Arabs have their own habits, the Persians are so, and God knows which one is the best. Chapter 6. Self-examination and remembrance to God. Know, my brother, that in the Keiran the Lord has said, "We shall set a fair balance on the day of judgment, and there shall be no soul persecuted in all things. Whoever has forged one item of good or evil, on that day will see it." In the Keiran it is also written, Every soul will see what was done before on the day of judgment. Caliph Umar once said, demand accountability from you before being held accountable. And the Lord said, O believers, be patient and fight against your lusts. And then Baruch Kamila. Al-Walis understand that they came into this world to organize a spiritual traffic. The gains or losses that result are heaven or hell. Therefore, they always look with caution to their treacherous bodies, can cause them to suffer huge losses. Therefore, it is only the wise men who after the dawn prayer spend an entire hour to make a spiritual calculation and say to his soul, O my soul, you have only one life, not a single moment can be returned, for in the treasury God your number of breaths is certain and cannot be added. When life is over, there is no more spiritual traffic that you may get. Therefore, what can you do? Do it now. The treatment of today is such that your life has you spend it all together and that today is the additional day bestowed on you by the mercy of Almighty God. What other mistakes are greater than wasting it? On the day of resurrection one will find all hours of his life lined up like a row of treasury cabinets. The door of one of the cabinets will open and will appear full of light. It reflects the time spent doing good. His heart will be filled with such great joy that part of it alone will make the inhabitants of hell forget the fire. The second closet door opens. In it was a pitch black and out of it the smell was bad, which caused everyone to close his nose. It reflects the moments spent on immorality. He will feel such a fear so much that part of it alone will soon make the residents of heaven restless and begging for mercy. The third cabinet door opened. In it looks empty. No light nor dark. It reflects the moments that are not used to do good or immoral. At that time he will feel very sorry and confused like a man who has a lot of treasure, but wasted it or let it just slip out of his grasp. So, the whole series of moments of his life will be shown one after another in front of his eyes. Because of that, one must say to his soul every morning, God has given you the treasures of 24 hours. Be careful that you will not lose any of them, for you will not be able to withstand regrets that will follow such losses. The saints have said, even if, for example, God will forgive you who wasted life, you will not be able to reach the level of the righteous and should regret your loss. So keep your tongue, your eyes and all of your members full, for each of them may be the gateway to hell. Speak to your body, if you rebel, I will actually punish you because even though the body is stubborn, it is capable of taking orders and can be tamed with concern. That is the purpose of self-examination, and the Prophet has said, happiness is for the man who is now doing the deeds that will benefit him after death. Now we come to Dhikrullah, which means to remember someone that God observes all his actions and thoughts. People see only the outward appearance, while God sees them, which is outside and inside of man. The person who truly believes in this will be able to discipline both the outer and the inward form. If he denies this, then he is an infidel, and if while believing him he acts contrary to his belief, then he has made the mistake of being the most arrogant of the pride. One day a Habzi came to the Messenger of Allah and said, O Messenger of God, I have committed many sins. Could my repentance be accepted? The Prophet replied, yes. Then the Habzi said, O Messenger of Allah, every time I commit a sin, does God really see it? Yes, he replied. The Habzi threw cries and then fell unconscious. Before one is fully convinced of the fact that he is always in God's observation, it is impossible for him to act on the right path. A sheikh once had a disciple whom he loved more than any other, thus arousing their envy. One day the sheikh gave each of his pupils a bird and ordered them to go and kill him somewhere that no one could see. Accordingly, each of his disciples killed his poultry in a secret place and brought it back, except his most beloved sheikh's disciple. He brought the bird back alive and said, I cannot find a place like that, because God always sees me everywhere. The sheikh also said to his other disciple, now you know the level of this young man. He has reached the level of always remembering God. When Zuleika seduces Joseph, he covers the cloth over the face of the idol he usually wore. Joseph said to him, O Zuleika, I am ashamed before a pile of rocks. Then should I not be ashamed before him who created the 7 heavens and the earth? One time someone came to Wali Junaid and said, I cannot hold my eyes from seeing exciting things. What should I do? Junaid replied, keeping in mind that God sees you much more clearly than you see others. In the Hadith Qudsi it is written that Allah says, Heaven is for those who wish to do sin, but then remember that my eyes are above them, and then they restrain themselves. Abdullah ibn Dinar narrated that once he walked with the Caliph Umar near Mecca when he met a shepherd boy was shepherding a flock of sheep. Umar said to him, Sell a lamb to me. The boy replied, These sheep are not mine, but my master's. Then to test it, Umar said, You can tell him that a wolf has snatched one of them, and he will not know anything about it. No, he will not know, said the boy, but God will know. Umar burst into tears and went to the boy's employer to bite and then released him, saying, Your words that have made you free in this world will make you free in the hereafter. There are 2 levels of this zikrullah. The first level is the level of the saints whose minds are entirely absorbed in the contemplation and majesty of God, and leave no room at all in their heart for other things. This is the lower level of dhikr, because when the human heart is fixed and its members are so controlled by their hearts that they abstain from the actions which are actually halal, then he no longer needs the tools or guardians of his sins. To this dhikr the Prophet said, The man who wakes up in the morning only with God in his mind will Allah guard him in this world and in the hereafter. Some of these reminders came so deep in memory of him that they did not listen to the person speaking to them, not seeing people walking in front of them, but wobbling as if they were breaking the wall. A wali narrates that one day he passed the place where archers were holding an archery race. Somewhere far away, somebody sits alone. I approached him and tried to talk to him, but he replied, Remembering God is better than talking. I said, Are not you lonely? No, he replied, God and 2 angels are with me. While pointing to the archers I asked, Which of them has managed to steal the title? The one who has been destined by God to take him, he replied. Then I asked, Where does this path come from? To this question he turns his eyes to the heavens, then rises and leaves as he says, O Rabbi, many of your creatures are preventing people from remembering you. The guardian of Shibli one day went to visit the Sufi Sari. He found Sari sitting so tranquil so that none of the hair in his body moved. Shibli also asked him, From whom did you learn to practice such tranquility? Sari replied, From a cat I see waiting in front of a rat hole with an even more serene attitude than I do. Ibn Hanif narrated. To me it was reported that in the city of Sur, a sheikh with a disciple always sat and resolved in dhikrullah. I went there and found them both sitting faces to Mecca. I greeted them 3 times, but I said, I ask for Allah's sake, that you answer my greetings. The younger raised his head and replied, O Ibn Hanif, this world exists only for a short time only. And from that short time there was little left. You have blocked us by demanding that we repay your greetings. He then bowed his head back and was silent. When I was hungry and thirsty, but the curiosity of the 2 men made me forget myself, I prayed Azhar and Maghrib together and then asked them to give spiritual advice. The younger replied, O Ibn Hanif, we are miserable people, we have no time to give advice. I remained standing there 3 days and 3 nights. Not a single word was ejected from us and nobody slept. Then, I thought to myself, I ask them for God's sake, to give me some advice. The younger man cajifed my mind, then once again lifted his head. Go and find someone who with visiting it will make you remember God, and instill fear in him in your heart, and that will give you advice through silence, not lawat kapnia. They are the dhikr of the wali, that is to be absorbed entirely in the contemplation of God. The second level of dhikrullah is the dhikr of right ashabul yamin. These people realized that God knew everything about them and felt ashamed in his presence. Nevertheless, they do not dissolve in the mind of his majesty, but remain completely self-conscious. Their situation is like someone who is suddenly stunned in a naked state and in a hurry to cover himself. The first-tier group resembles a person who suddenly finds himself in front of a king and feels confused and shocked. The second-tier group deliberately investigates everything that comes to their mind, for on the last day 3 questions will be asked regarding every action. Why do you do it? How did you do that? What is your purpose doing it? The first is asked because a person should act on divine impulses rather than demonic or bodily encouragement. If this question is answered well, then the second question will test how the work is done wisely or carelessly and negligently. And third, the work is done only for the sake of seeking God's approval or for the sake of human praise. If a person understands the meaning of these questions, he or she will become very aware of the state of his or her heart and how he or she will think before you act. To distinguish those thoughts is difficult and impossible, and a person who is unable to do so should associate himself with a spiritual director who can illuminate his heart. He must really shy away from the worldly, literally educated men. They are satanic agents. Allah says to David as, "O David, do not ask about the learned men poisoned by the love of the world, for he will rob my love from you." And the Prophet said, God loves a meticulous person in researching questions of doubt and which does not allow his mind to be dominated by his desires. Reason and distinction are closely related, and the person in whom reason does not control lust will not thoroughly conduct an investigation. In addition to some warnings about research before acting, one must also strictly hold accountable for his or her past actions. Every night he must examine his heart with regard to what he has done, in order to see that he has been lucky or lost in the capital of his soul. This is more important, because the heart is like a treacherous trading partner who is always ready to cheat and deceive. Sometimes he reveals his own selfishness in the form of obedience to God in such a way that one might think that he had been lucky when in fact he was losing money. A wali named A.K.A, 60 years old, counted the days of his life and he found that his days numbered 21,600 days. He said to himself, "Woe me, if I only committed one sin every day, how can I escape from the heap of 21,600 sins?" He shrieked and fell to the ground. When people came to awaken him they found he was dead. But most people are negligent and never think to hold themselves accountable. If for every sin he committed, someone placed a stone in an empty house, soon he would find the house full of stones. If the recording angel demands his wages for the work of writing down his sins, then all his money will quickly vanish. People count the beads of tasbih with satisfaction every time they finish mentioning God's name, but they do not have a beads to count the countless vain words they have uttered. Therefore, Caliph Umar said, "Weigh your words and your actions before they are weighed at the time of the judgment." He himself before taking a break every night used to beat his feet with horror and then exclaimed, "What have you done today?" Abu Talha once prayed in a palm tree garden when he saw a beautiful bird passing by caused him to miscalculate the amount of prostration he had done. To punish himself for his negligence, he gives his corpore to others. Such guardians know that their sensual nature tends to get lost. Therefore they watched closely and punished him for every mistake he made. If a person finds himself ignorant and refuses a careful and self-disciplined attitude, he must always be with someone who is capable in such practices in order for him to be infected with the enthusiasm of the master. A wali used to say, "If I am reluctant in doing self-discipline, I look at Muhammad Wasi, and looking at him alone will rekindle my spirits, at least for a week." If one cannot find such a precise example around him, then it is good for him to study the lives of the guardians. He also must push his soul. "Oh my soul, you think you are smart and angry if you are called a fool, then what are you doing? You prepare your clothes to cover yourself from winter bites, but do not prepare yourself for your afterlife. Your situation is like someone who in the middle of winter says, 'I will not wear warm clothes, but trust in God's grace to protect me from the cold.' He forgets that at the same time he creates the cold. God shows man how to make clothing to protect himself from him and provide the material for the garment. Remember, your punishment in the hereafter is not because God is angry at your disobedience, and do not think, maybe my sin interferes with God. It is your own lust that will ignite the flames of hell in you. The unhealthy food a person eats illnesses on a person's body, not because the doctor is annoyed to him for violating his counsels. Woe unto you, O self, for your excessive love for the world. If you do not believe in heaven and hell, how can you believe in death that will take away all your worldly pleasures and cause you to suffer by the separation is proportional to your attachment to worldly pleasures? That is why you are created after the world. If everything, from east to west, is yours and worship you, yet in a short time it will be transformed into dust with you, and annihilation will wipe out your name as kings before you. But now, you only have a very small part of this world, and that too dirty part of it. Will you be so crazy to exchange eternal happiness with it, expensive gems with a broken glass made of clay, and make you laugh at the people around you? Chapter 7. Marriage as a pendrawn or remedy in the life of life. Marriage plays a large role in human life, so it needs to be taken into account in the subject of religious life and is discussed in two aspects, namely the advantages and disadvantages. Knowing that Allah, as the Qur'an says, only creates humans and jinn for worship, the first and tangible advantage in marriage is that the worshippers of God are becoming increasingly numerous. Therefore, the Kalam scholars have compiled a proverb: it is better to be preoccupied in marriage duties than in sun rituals. Another advantage of marriage is that, as the Prophet says, children's prayers are beneficial to their parents if their parents have died, and children who die before their parents will ask forgiveness for them on the day of judgment. The Prophet also said, when a child is commanded to go to heaven, he cries and says, I will not enter it without my father and mother. Also, one day the Prophet loudly pulled someone's stray arm towards him while saying, thus the children gather together in the gates of heaven and scream for their fathers and mothers, until the two are still out to be instructed to enter and join their children. It was narrated from a well-known wali that he once dreamed that the day of judgment had come. The sun has drawn near to the earth and people are dying of thirst. A group of children walks around giving them water from gold and silver dishes. But when the wali asked for water, he was rejected, and one of the boys said to him, not one of us is your children. As soon as the wali wakes up he plans to marry. Another advantage of marriage is that sitting together and being kind to a wife is an act that gives a relaxed feeling to the mind after having fun on religious duties. And after relaxing like that one can return to worship with new spirit. Thus the Prophet alone, when feeling the burden of revelation pressing too much upon him, he touched his wife Aisha and said, Speak to me, O Aisha, talk to me. This is done because of the warm human touch it can gain the power to receive new revelations. For the same reason he used to ask Bilal to call the azan, and sometimes he also smelled the fragrant wangjin. One of his famous hadiths is, I love three things in this world: fragrance, women and refreshment with prayer. Once Umar asked the Prophet about the most important things to look for in this world. He, as peace be upon him, replied, the tongue that always remembers Allah, a heart full of gratitude and a trusting wife. Another advantage of marriage is the presence of a person who maintains a home, cooks food, washes dishes, sweeps floors and so on. If a man is busy with the works, he cannot seek knowledge, practice his trade or perform his worship properly. For this reason Abu Sulaiman said, a good wife is not only mercy in this world, but also in the hereafter, because she gives her husband free time to think about the afterlife. And one of Umar's sayings is, after faith, no mercy can match the good wife. In addition, marriage still has another advantage. Being patient with women's trivia, providing for the needs of wives and keeping them on the path of the law, is a very important part of religion. The Prophet said, providing a living to a wife is more important than giving alms. Once, when Ibn Mubarak was addressing the unbelievers, One of his companions asked him, "Is there any other work that rewards more than jihad?" "Yes," he replied, "that is to properly feed and clothe the wife and children." The famous Wali al-Abisar Hafi said, "It is better for someone to work for wife and child than for himself." In the hadith narrated that some sins can only be redeemed by bearing the burden of the family. With regard to a wali, it is narrated that his wife died and he did not intend to remarry, even though people urged him, saying that by doing so it would be easier for him to concentrate and his mind in Islam. One night he saw in his dream the gates of heaven opened and a number of angels descended, then approached him, and one of them asked, "Is this a selfish, wretched person?" And his colleagues replied, "Yes, this is it." The guard was so stunned he did not have time to ask who they were talking about. But suddenly a boy passes by and he asks her, "You're the one they're talking about?" The boy replied, "It was only last week that your good deeds were recorded in heaven with the other guardians, but now they have wiped your name out of the notebook." After awakening with a questioning mind, he immediately made plans to mate. Of all the above, it appears that marriage is desirable. Now we will talk about the disadvantages of marriage. One of them is the existence of a danger, especially in the present, that a man must earn a living by means of the haram to support his family, whereas no good deeds can atone for the sin. The Prophet said that on the day of resurrection there will be a man who carries a mountain of good deeds and places him near Mizan. Then he was asked, "How do you support your family?" He cannot give a satisfactory answer. Then all his good deeds will be wiped out and a statement will be issued regarding him. "This is the man whose family has swallowed up all his good deeds." Another disadvantage of marriage is that treating the family well and patiently in solving their problems can only be done by people of good character. There is a great danger if a man treats his family roughly or ignores them, causing sin for himself. The Prophet, he said, "A man who leaves his wife and children is like a running slave. Before he returns to them, his fast and prayer will not be accepted by God." In summary, man has low qualities, and before he can control his nature, it is better he does not take responsibility for controlling others. Someone asked the Wali Bisr Hafi why he did not marry. "I am afraid," he replied, to the verse of the Keiran, "Women's rights over men are exactly the same as men's rights over women." The third disadvantage of marriage is that taking care of a family often prevents a person from focusing his attention on God and the hereafter. And it may be that unless he is careful, it will drag him to destruction, for God has said, "Let not your wives and children turn you away from the remembrance of Allah." One who thinks that by not marrying he can concentrate better on his religious duties, it is better to remain alone. And those who fear to fall into sin if they do not marry, it is better to marry. Now we come to the qualities that must be sought in a wife. First, the most important of them, is chastity. If a person has a wife of morality and he remains silent, he gets a bad name and hampers his religious life. If he speaks, his life becomes corrupted. And if he divorces his wife, he will suffer the pain of separation. A beautiful but morally beautiful wife is such a catastrophe, so it is better for her husband to divorce her. The Prophet said, "A man who seeks a wife for his beauty or his wealth will lose both." The second good thing in a wife is good character. Worshipped wives, ungrateful, gossip or arrogant, make life unbearable and a major obstacle to establishing a life of piety. The third trait to look for is beauty, because it will create love and affection. Therefore, one must look at a woman before marrying her. The Prophet said, "The women of this and that tribe have a defect in their spies. One who wants to marry someone among them must see him first." The wise man said that someone who marries a woman without seeing it first, will surely regret later. It is true that one should not marry for beauty, but this does not mean that the beauty of Mzidi is considered unimportant. The fourth important thing about a wife is that the amount of dowry paid by a man to his wife must be in a midsum. The Prophet said, "The best woman to be married is that her dowager is small and her beauty value is great." He himself gave dowries to some of his wives about 10 dirhams, and the dowries of his daughters alone were no more than 400 dirhams. The other qualities a good wife must have are coming from a good descendant, not married before and not too close in a familial relationship with her husband. Things to do in marriage first. Because marriage is a religious institution, it must be treated religiously. Otherwise, the encounter between man and woman is no better than an animal encounter. The Sharia commands a banquet in every marriage. When Abdurrahman bin Auf celebrated the marriage of the Prophet, said to him, "Make a wedding party, even if only with a goat." When the Prophet personally celebrated his marriage with Shafi'iyah, he made a wedding party and served dates and wheat alone. Likewise, marriage should be enlivened by hitting tambourines and playing music, because humans are the crown of creation. Second, a husband and wife must continue to be nice to his wife. This does not mean that he should not hurt him, but should bear patiently all the bad feelings caused by his wife, either because of the unbearability of his wife's attitude or his unfavorable attitude. Women are created weak and need protection. Therefore he must be treated with patience and continue to be protected. The Prophet said, "A person who is able to endure the unhappiness aroused by his wife with patience will earn as much reward as received by Job for his patience to bear the rains that befall him." In the moments before his death, people heard also the Prophet said, "Keep praying and treating your wives well, because they are your captives." He himself always bore patiently the behavior of his wives. One day Omar's wife got angry and scolded him. He said to him, "Hi, you who sharp tongue, dare you answer me?" His wife replied, "Yes, the prophets of the prophets are better than you, while his wives alone argue with him." He replied, "What to Hafsa, Purdy Sayyidina Umar, wife of the Prophet, if he does not humble himself?" And when he met Hafsa, he said, "Watch out, you do not argue the apostle." The Prophet also said, "The best among you is the best attitude to his own family, and I am the best attitude towards my family." Third, a husband and wife should be pleased with his recreations and his pleasures and not try to stop him. The Prophet himself at one time ever raced away with his wife, Aisha. In the first time the Prophet defeated Aisha, and the second time, Aisha defeated her. At other times, he held Aisha so that he could see some Habsi people dancing. In fact, it would be difficult to find someone who is so kind to his wives as the Prophet did. Wise men say, a husband should come home with a smile and eat whatever is available and not ask for anything that is not available. However, he should not be exaggerated so that his wife does not lose respect for it. If he sees something that his wife is clearly wrong to do, he should not ignore it, but must rebuke it. Or if not, it will be just a laughingstock. In the Qur'an it is written, "Men are leaders for women," and the Prophet said, "Woe to the man who became his wife's slave. It should be his wife who is his servant." Wise men say, "Consult with women and do what is against what they advise." There is a rebellious attitude in women, and if they are allowed even a little, they will be totally out of control and it is difficult to return them to a good attitude. In business with them, one must endeavor to use a combination of firmness and compassion with affection as the greater part. The Prophet said, "Woman is made like a crooked rib. If you try to straighten it out, you will break it. If you leave it so, it will still be crooked, so treat it with affection." Fourth, in the case of a moral offense, a husband must be very careful not to let his wife be seen or look upon a stranger, since the beginning of all that damage is from the eye. Do not allow him to leave the house, stand in the attic or stand at the door. However, you must be careful not to be jealous for no reason and to be too strict. One day the Prophet asked his son, Fatima, "What is best for women?" He replied, "They cannot meet strangers, nor strangers can meet them." The Prophet glad to hear this answer and embrace it while saying, "Surely you are a part of my heart." Amir al-Mu'minin Umar said, "Do not give women good clothes, because as soon as they wear them they want to get out of the house." During the lifetime of the Prophet, women were allowed to go to the mosque and stay in the back row. But gradually this is prohibited. Fifth, a husband must provide for his wife and not be miserly to him. Providing a proper living to a wife is better than giving alms. The Prophet says, suppose a man spends 1 dinar for jihad, 1 dinar again to redeem a local, 1 dinar again for alms and gives a dinar to his wife, so this final reward exceeds the third reward. Sixth, a husband should not eat something delicious alone, or even if he has eaten it, he must be silent and not praise him in front of his wife. If there are no guests, it is better for couples to eat together, because the Prophet said, if they do that, Allah sends His mercy upon them and the angels pray for them. The most important thing is that the living provided to the wife must be obtained by lawful means. If the wife is rebellious and disobedient, the husband first must advise her gently. If this is not enough, they should sleep in separate rooms for 3 nights. If this also does not work, then the husband may hit him, but not in his mouth, nor too hard to hurt him. If the wife is negligent in her religious duties, the husband must show displeasure to him for a whole month, as the Prophet did to his wives. Always act carefully to avoid divorce, because, although divorce is allowed, God does not like it. Divorce alone has caused suffering for a woman, and how can one justify hurt another? If the divorce is compulsory, it should not be repeated 3 times at a time, but must be at 3 different times. A woman must be divorced, not with anger or contempt, nor without reason. After the divorce, a man must give muta to his ex-wife, and not tell others the reasons or mistakes his wife made so they divorced. From a husband who was about to divorce his wife, it was reported that people asked him, "Why did you divorce her?" He replied, "I will not reveal the secrets of my wife." When he finally divorced him, he was asked again and said, "He's a stranger to me now, I'm no longer dealing with his personal matters." So far we have discussed the rights of wives over her husband, but husbands' rights over their wives are more binding. The Prophet said, "If it were permissible to worship anything other than God, I would order the wives to worship their husbands." A wife should not touting her beauty in front of her husband, should not repay the kindness of the husband with feelings of no thanks. The wife should not say to her husband, "Why do you treat me like this and that?" The Prophet he said, "I looked into hell and saw many women there, I asked the cause and got the answer, because they did bad to their husbands and did not thank him." Chapter 8. Love to God. Love of God is the most important topic and the ultimate goal of our discussion so far. We have spoken of spiritual dangers because they are obstructing the love of God in the hearts of men. We have also talked about the various good qualities required for it. The perfection of humanity lies here, that the love of God must conquer the human heart and dominate it completely. Even if love for God does not master it completely, then it must be the greatest feeling in his heart, overcoming love to others. Nevertheless, it is easy to understand that the love of God is something that is difficult to achieve, so that a theology of theology has in fact denied that man can love a form which is not his own species. They have defined the love of God as mere obedience. People who think so really do not know what religion is. All Muslims agree that love to God is a duty. Allah says concerning the believers, He loves them and they love Him. And the Prophet said, before someone loves God and His Prophet more than loves others, he has no true faith. When the angel of death came to take the life of Prophet Ibrahim, Ibrahim said, "Have you seen a friend take his friend's life?" God replied, "Have you seen a friend who does not like to see his friend?" So Ibrahim said, "O people of Israel, take my life." The following prayer is taught by the Prophet to his companions: "O God, grant me love to you and love to those who love you, and whatever brings me closer to your love, make your love more precious to me than cold water to the thirsty." Hassan Basri often said, "He who knows God will love him, and those who know the world will hate him." Now we will discuss the essential nature of love. Love can be defined as a tendency to something pleasant. This is apparent with respect to our five senses. Each of the senses loves everything that gives it pleasure. So, the eyes love the beautiful forms, the ears love the musk, and so on. This is a kind of love that animals also have. But there is a sixth sense, the faculty of perception, embedded in the heart and not possessed by animals. With it we become aware of the beauty and spiritual superiority. So, a person who is only familiar with sensual pleasures will not be able to understand what the Prophet meant when he said that he loves more prayers than fragrances in women, although both are also pleasing to him. But the man whose heart is open to seeing the beauty and perfection of God will despise all external visions, however beautiful they seem to be. Humans who are only familiar with sensual pleasures will say that beauty is in red and white colors, harmonious limbs and so on, while he is blind to the moral beauty that people mean when they talk about this person and the person it has good character. But those who have deeper perceptions find it very possible to love the great men who have been far ahead of us, as the caliphs of Omar and Abu Bakr say, with respect to their noble qualities, even though their remains have long been once mixed with dust. Such love is not directed to the external form but to the spiritual qualities. Even when we want to awaken a sense of love within a child to another, we do not describe the outward beauty of the form or the other, but the spiritual superiorities. If we apply this principle to the love of God, we will find that he alone is worthy of love. And if one does not love him, then it is because he does not recognize him. For this reason, we love Muhammad, may peace be upon him, for he is the prophet and the love of God. And the love of the wise men and the bar taqwa is truly the love of God. We will see this more clearly when we discuss causes that can arouse love. The first cause is a person's love for himself and his own perfection. This leads directly to the love of God, because humanity and human nature are none other than God's grace. Had it not been for his goodness, man would never have appeared from behind the veil of invisibility to the visible world. Maintenance and attainment of human perfection also depends entirely on the mercy of God. It is strange if someone sought refuge from the heat of the sun under the shadow of a tree and was not grateful to a tree without which there would be no shadow at all. Similarly, if it were not for God, man would not be there and would not have any properties at all. Therefore he would love God if it were not for his foolishness toward him. The fools cannot love him, because his love for him radiates directly from his knowledge. And from when does a fool have knowledge? For the second of this love is the love of man to something that is meritorious to him, and in truth the only culprit to him is only God. Because whatever goodness he receives from his fellow human beings is caused by a direct impulse from God. Any motive that moves a person to the good of others, whether it is a desire for a reward or a good name, it is God who employs the motive. The third is the love that is awakened by the contemplation of the attributes of God, his power and wisdom, which in comparison with all human powers and policies is nothing more than the most trivial of mirrors. This love is similar to the love we feel for great men in the past, such as Imam Malik and Imam Shafi, though we never expect to receive personal gain from them. And therefore, this love is a kind of love that is more unprivileged. Allah says to Prophet David, "My most loving ones are those who do not seek me for fear of being punished or wishing to be rewarded, but only for the sake of paying the debt to my lordship." In the Gospels it is written, "Who is more pagan than the one who worships me for fear of hell or expects paradise? If I do not create them, will not I be worthy of worship?" For the fourth of this love is the equality between man and God. This is what is meant in the words of the Holy Prophet, "Verily Allah created man in resemblance to himself." Furthermore, Allah has said, "My servant is near to me so that I make him my friend, I become his ears, his eyes and his tongue." Also Allah said to Moses, "I was sick but you did not visit me." Moses replied, "O God, you are the Lord of the heavens and the earth, how can you be sick?" Allah says, "One of my servants is sick, and by visiting it you have visited me." Indeed this is a rather dangerous matter to be discussed, as this is behind the understanding of ordinary people. A smart person can stumble into talking about this and believing in incarnation and fellowship with God. Nevertheless, the equality between man and God removes the objection of the aforesaid Kalam scholar who holds that man cannot love a being which is not of its own species. Whatever the distance that separates them, humans can love God because of the equations required in the word of the prophet. God created man in resemblance to himself. Appearing to God, all Muslims claim to believe that seeing God is the pinnacle of human happiness, as it is expressed in Sharia. But for many people this is merely a mere lipstick that does not arouse feelings in the heart. This is natural, for how can one covet something that he does not know? We will try to show you briefly why to see God is the greatest happiness that man can gain. First of all human faculties have their own functions that want to be induced. Each has his own good, ranging from the lowest body lust to the highest form of intellectual understanding. But a mental effort in its lower form still gives greater pleasure than the satisfaction of carnal desires. So, if someone happens to be absorbed in a game of chess, he will not remember eating even if repeatedly called. And the higher our knowledge, the greater our joy will be. For example, we would be more glad to know the secrets of a king than the secrets of a vizier. Given that God is the ultimate object of knowledge, his knowledge of him will surely provide greater pleasure than any other. People who know God, in this world though, seem to feel that they have been in heaven, as wide as the heavens and the earth. A heaven whose fruits are so delicious that no one can prevent them from picking them. And a paradise that does not become more narrow by the number of people who live in it. But the joy of knowledge is still much smaller than the enjoyment of sight, just as our pleasure in daydreaming our loved ones is far less than the pleasure given by their direct vision. Our imprisonment in this body of clay and water, and our preoccupation with the senses, creates a curtain that prevents us from appearing from God, even though that does not prevent us from obtaining some knowledge of him. For this reason, God said to Moses on Mount Sinai, "You cannot see me." The real thing is as follows. Just as the human seed will become a human and the seeds of palm planted will become palm trees, the knowledge of God acquired on earth will be transformed into the appearance of God in the hereafter, and those who have never studied that knowledge will never experience that vision. This apparition will not be shared equally to those who know, but the degree of clarity will vary according to their knowledge. God is one, but he will be seen in many different ways. Just as an object is reflected in various ways by various mirrors. There are those who show a straight shadow, some are diffuse, some are clear and others are rough. A mirror may have been so damaged that it could make a beautiful shape even if it was not bad, and one might carry a heart so dark and dirty to the hereafter, that the vision for others is a source of happiness and peace, to her a source of sadness. A person in whose heart love for God has surpassed others will inhale more happiness from this vision than the one in whose heart's love is not so superior. Just as the same two human beings have sharp eyes. When looking at a beautiful face, the person who has loved the owner of the face will be happier in staring at him than the person who does not love. In order to enjoy perfect happiness, knowledge alone without love is not enough. And the love of God cannot fill the heart of man before he is purified from the love of a world that can only be obtained with suhud. While in this world, the human state of seeing God is like a lover who will see his loving face in the dusk of dawn, while his clothes are filled with bees and scorpions that constantly torment him. But if the sun rises and reveals the beloved's face in all its beauty and the venomous animals stop torturing her, then the lover's happiness will become like the love of the servant of God who, after getting out of the shadows and being liberated from the torturers in this world, sees him without a curtain. Abu Sulaiman said, "The man who is busy with him now, will be busy with himself later, and the man who is busiest with God now, will be busied with him someday." Yahya ibn Mu'adh narrates that he observed Bayezid Bastami in his prayers throughout the night. When it was finished, Bayezid stood up and said, "O Lord! Some servants have requested and gained the ability to perform miracles, walk on the water, fly in the air, but not all that I ask. Some others have requested and gained possessions, but that's not what I asked for." Then Bayezid turned, and when he saw Yahya, he asked, "You are in that sane Yahya?" He replied, "Yes." He asked again, "Since when?" "It's been a long time." Yahya then asked him to reveal some of his spiritual experiences. "I will reveal," replied Bayezid, "nothing kosher to tell you. The power has demonstrated his kingdom to me, from the noblest to the last. He lifted me upon a throne and chairs in the 7 heavens. Then he said, 'Ask me anything you want.' I replied, 'O Allah, I do not know anything but you.' Verily, he said, 'You are my servant.'" At other times Bayezid said, "If Allah will give you familiarity with himself or Abraham, the power in the prayer of Moses and the martyrdom of Jesus, then keep your face pointing toward him alone, for he has treasures that even surpass them." One day a friend said to him, "For 30 years I have fasted by day and worshipped at night, but I have not found the bliss of the soul that you mentioned." Bayezid replied, "Even if you fast and pray for 300 years, you still will not find it." "Why?" asked the companion. "Because," said Bayezid, "your selfishness has become a curtain between you and God." "If so, tell me how healing." "You cannot do it that way." Yet when his companion forced him to reveal it, Bayezid said, "Go to the nearest barber and ask him to shave off your beard. Open all your clothes except the corset that wraps around your waist. Take a bag full of walnut, hang on your neck, go to the market and shout, 'Everyone who hits my neck will get a walnut.' Then in that state go to the place of the Qadi and Faqih." "Gosh," said his friend, "I really cannot do it." "Give me another way of healing." "That was a prelude to the healing," replied Bayezid. "But, as I told you, you cannot be healed." Bayezid's reason for pointing out such a way of healing is the fact that his best friend is an ambitious position and ambassador. Ambition and pride are diseases that can only be healed in such ways. Allah said to Jesus, "O Jesus, if I see in the hearts of my servants the pure love of myself who is not polluted with selfish desires in regard to this world or the world to come, then I will be the watchman of that love." Also when people asked Isa as to show the most honorable deed, he replied, "Loving God and surrendering to his will." Rabia's guardian was once asked her for love of the Prophet. "The love of the Creator," he said, "has prevented me from loving beings." Ibrahim bin Adam said in his prayer, "O Allah, in my eyes the heaven itself is still more trivial than a gnome compared to your love and the blessing of thou that which thou hast bestowed upon me." One who suspects that it is possible to enjoy happiness in the afterlife without loving God, has gone too far, for the essence of the future life is to arrive at God as it comes to an object of long-coveted desire achieved by the obstacles that are not spelled out a lot. The enjoyment of God is happiness. But if he has no pleasure in God before, he will not rejoice in it later. And if his happiness in God was so small, he would be small. In short, our future happiness will be exactly the same as our love for God now. But not Zubillah. If in the heart of a person has grown a love of something contrary to God, then the circumstances of the afterlife will be completely foreign to him. And anything that will make others happy will make him sad. This can be explained by the following anecdotes. A vulture goes to a market that sells perfumes. When he smelled the fragrance he fainted. People crowded around him and splashed rose water on him, then brought the misk, perfume, to his nose. But it gets worse. Finally someone came. He himself is also a carcass eater. He brought the trash to the man's nose. Then the man immediately realized, sighing with satisfaction, "Well, this is just really perfumed." Thus, in the hereafter man will no longer find the lewd pleasures of this world. The spiritual joys of the world will be completely new to him and will increase his depravity. For the afterlife is a world of spirits and is the embodiment of the beauty of God. Happiness is for the man who has been after him and is attracted to him. All the devotions, worship and studies will make that interest the goal, and it is love. This is the meaning of the Quranic verse. The one who has purified his soul will be happy, sins and lust directly contrary to the attainment of this interest. Therefore, the Keiran says, and the man who pollutes his soul will lose money. Those who are endowed with spiritual insight have truly understood this truth as a reality of experience, not just a traditional proverb. Their very clear perception of righteousness leads them to the conviction that the person who brought the truth is truly a prophet, as if someone had studied medicine when he listened to a doctor. This is a kind of belief that does not require the support of miracles, such as turning a log into a snake that may still be shaken with miraculous miracles of the same kind performed by sorcerers. Signs of love to God. Many people claim to have loved God, but each must examine himself with regard to the purity of love he has. The first test is, he must not hate the thought of dying, because no one, friend, is frightened when will meet his friend. The prophet saying, who wants to see God? God wants to see it. It is true that a sincere lover of God may be afraid of death before he completes his preparation for the hereafter, but if he is sincere, he will be diligent in making these preparations. The second test of sincerity is one must be willing to sacrifice his will for the will of God, must cling to what brings him closer to God, and must abstain from places that cause him to be away from God. The fact that a person has sinned is not proof that he does not love God at all, but that only proves that he does not love him with all his heart. Guardian Futil said to someone, if someone asks you, love you to Allah, then be silent, for if you say, I do not love him, then you become a kafir, and if you say, yes, I love God, when your works contradict that. The third test is that Iqra must automatically continue to remain fresh in the human heart. Because, if a person is loving, he will continue to remember, and if his love is perfect, then he will never forget him. Nevertheless, it may well be that while the love of God does not occupy a central place in a person's heart, the love of God is in that place, for love is something and love of love is something else. The fourth test is that he will love the Qur'an, which is the word of God, and Muhammad Nabi Allah. If his love is indeed strong, he will love all men, for they are all God's servants. In fact, his love will cover all creatures, because people who love someone will love the works of creation and handwriting. The fifth test is, he will be greedy towards Allah for worship purposes. He will continue to crave the coming of the night in order to connect with his friend without hindrance. If he prefers conversing during the day and sleeping at night rather than Allah like that, then his love is not perfect. God said to David, do not get too close to human beings, because there are two kinds of people who block my presence. Those who desire to seek rewards and then their spirits loosen up when they have got it, and those who prefer their own thoughts rather than remembers me. The signs of my absence are that I left him alone. In fact, if the love of God really controls the human heart, then all love to others will be lost. One of the children of Israel had a habit of praying at night. But when he knew that a bird could sing very beautifully on a tree, he began to pray under the tree in order to enjoy the pleasure of listening to the bird. God commanded Otas to go and say to him, you have mixed the love of a sweet bird with love for me, then your level among the saints is also degrading. On the other hand, some people have loved God with such love, that when they are worshipping in worship, their homes have been burned and they do not know it. The sixth test is that worship becomes easy for him. Awali said, during the first 30 years I practiced my night worship with great effort, but 30 years later it has become a pleasure for me. If the love of God is perfect, there is no happiness that can match the happiness of worship. The seventh test is that lovers of God will love those who obey him, and hate the disbelievers and disobedient people, as the Qur'an says. They are hard against the unbelievers and are affectionate with each other. The Prophet, once asked Allah, O Allah, who are your lovers? And the answer came, those who cling to me as a child to his mother, who take refuge in a reminder to me as a bird looks for shade in its nest, and it would be very upset to see sin as an angry tiger who is not afraid to anything. Wallahu alam. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mualaikum 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 warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.